good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining me. Let me make sure that you guys can hear me. Actually, do me a favor. If you can hear and see me, give me a thumbs up or drop me a quick note, please. I just want to make sure that you guys can hear me and see me so we can get that cleared away if needed. Hi, Prophetic Wind Global Ministries channel. So I'm assuming you can hear me. Everybody okay? You can hear me? I'm going to give it about one more minute and then we're going to get started. So this morning we have folks joining on LinkedIn. I see there are a couple of folks on YouTube, and I don't know if we'll have any folks joining from Twitter. You can hear me. Thank you so much for confirming. But I really wanted to have this conversation on performance reviews and make it as just kind of accessible and direct as possible, because it's that time of the year. And I got to say, one of my least favorite things, speaking for myself, was performance reviews, both giving and getting. And it had nothing to do with the quality of the person I was reviewing or, my own quality or anything like that. It just always seemed to be loaded with unnecessary angst. And over the years, of course, I found that seems to be a sort of universal challenge, I guess, if we want to put it that way. So we're at about 10:01 now Pacific. So I'll introduce myself briefly, and then we're going to dive right into the conversation. But thank you guys so much for being here, for being in this conversation, for wanting performance reviews to no longer be a source of angst and an acrimonious relationship with your staff or with your boss or whatever the case is. And to actually try to get more strategic. So that launches me into introducing myself. My name is Bribiesca-Hedin. If you've never been with me in any sort of space, either virtual or in real life, I am a professional leadership coach. I own Bridgewell Professional Services. We're a strategy execution and leadership development company here in Southern California. I'm here in my home office in La Crescenta, a little town about 20 minutes north of downtown Los Angeles. Feels like it's a million miles away because we're at the foothills, but it's just 20 minutes away, which is kind of the best of all worlds. So I'm happy to be with you guys here today and having this conversation on performance reviews. As I mentioned a moment ago, as I was just kind of rambling as we were making sure you all can hear me and everything, I thought it was really important to have this conversation because performance reviews are such a source of both angst and dissatisfaction. Right. The entire process is often particularly stressful, and it really doesn't matter what side of the equation you're on. Is that fair, you guys? It doesn't matter what side of the equation you're on, whether you are giving or receiving. Oh, there we go. Sorry about that. Let me make sure that I really am on Do Not Disturb so we don't get any more calls ringing through. Okay, excellent. I'm back. So I'm looking forward to having you guys being involved in this conversation and actually providing feedback on what it is that's working for you, what hasn't worked for you, et cetera. Of course, we all probably have a couple of nightmare recollections about some performance review process or the stress that we went through. So you're also safe sharing that here as well. So I'm going to dive in now. I did go ahead and create some slides because it allows me to kind of be a little more focused with my time, because if you've ever been with me in any sort of space, there's no shortage of words on my part. And I want to make sure that I'm delivering as much value as possible in the limited time that we have. So between now and the next, 55 minutes, you get as much as you can and actually have immediate next steps about what to do and what maybe state of mind, effective questions to ask yourself. And I'll get into what it is that we're going to be covering in a moment. But I want to make sure that you can walk away with that and that we have a few minutes at the end so that you can ask any questions again. And we can make this as valuable as possible for everyone watching, because odds are the challenges you're having are not unique. So we want to make sure that you feel comfortable sharing your challenges, sharing your questions, and even pushing back on the advice that I recommend, because the opportunity to dig in actually makes the session even more valuable. So don't be shy. Okay, with that, I want to start with just a couple of foundational kind of assertions. To make progress on anything that's at all important to you, in particular if it's a high priority, you need to stay strategic. We all do. We need to stay strategic, but that's not necessarily where our brains go, in particular when we think that there's a lot on the line. So just foundation, we need to stay strategic. I'm assuming nobody's going to disagree with that piece. Next, anyone can learn to be more strategic. Right? And what do we mean when we're talking about being strategic? And you guys, please feel free to share in the chat. I want to hear from you. What is being strategic to you? What does being strategic mean to you? Right? Because I titled this Getting Strategic with Performance Reviews, and it wasn't just to come up with a snazzy title, but because I mean something very deliberate when I say that. So what is getting strategic to you? And you guys can share that in the chat, and I'll be coming back and forth to the chat and referencing your comments. But I will share my perspective. The very nature of strategy is making decisions in advance about what you will and what you won't do, about what's most important, and about the tactics you're going to use to bring that important objective to fruition, right? That just in a very kind of simple, plain, everyday way. And so getting strategic with performance reviews is having that clarity around the outcome you're trying to create. Right? Sometimes we're trying to, it's so hard just to push through the process and get it over with that we didn't stop to think about the outcome we're actually trying to create. And strategy is about making decisions in advance about that outcome and how we're going to create it. And yes, so I see Selena forming a plan with actionable items. Absolutely. Absolutely. Making a plan. Thanks you guys for sharing. And of course, keep them coming. And absolutely, you want to make a plan. But getting strategic and staying strategic is about how you mobilize that plan in a way that it actually informs how you do what you do, right? Because otherwise it ends up like some great distinction that you gathered somewhere along the way, or, an organization's strategic plan that lives somewhere on the intranet, but is not part of the day-to-day conversations. It does not inform, what you do, how you spend your time, how you establish priorities, how you engage with others to make sure that they're aware of what's happening with those priorities. So there's just so much to staying strategic that we don't often talk about, which is also why I created, the programs that I have, and I'll tell you about that at the very end. But, some of you are already familiar with my intentional leadership program, and the real crux of that is about staying strategic and making really good, high quality decisions all the time. Not just at the beginning, right, when you first wrote the strategic plan, but day to day, informing how that plan is going to be brought to fruition by what you're doing, right? Not coming back at the end of the year and looking back and saying, oh, I think we kind of forgot about these couple things, but just staying really deliberate and having it inform what we do every day. And then that last kind of foundational point that I want to establish is when you do it right, being focused and strategic is actually easier. It definitely brings more success, but it absolutely brings more peace of mind to your professional and personal life than winging it and going along and just kind of seeing how things turn out. So I want you to hold on to that, because some of you guys are going to want to push back against that last one, but just, sit with it as we're talking, and hopefully it'll start to kind of seem pretty clear and apparent how that could possibly be the case. So let's get started. Now, one of the things I talk about a lot is the importance of being the CEO of your career, of your development, right? The chief strategist when it comes to all things you, all of the decisions that you make. And, the reason that that's so important is that if we individually don't make the time and devote the effort to distinguish what it is that's most important to us, what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and show up like the chief strategist, what ends up happening is that we're just along for the ride. For wherever that next client, that next economic shift, that next boss, the next employer happens to take us. And it's a real loss of your impact and opportunity when you don't know where you're going and you're just kind of going along and seeing. Because here's the thing, you can start out really well, right? Just going along. You might, I liken it to getting to a bus stop and just deciding to get on the next bus that shows up. You don't actually know where it's going. You don't know where you're going, but the bus is kind of clean. It's kind of comfortable. You're like, all right, I'll have a seat here. We'll see what happens. The challenge with doing that is that before you know it, you're farther away than you would have ever intended from what you actually want to create. And all that was missing was that deliberate intention to distinguish and identify and clarify, yeah, this is where I want to go. This is what I'm trying to make happen. This is what's actually important. Because in the absence of that, you end up going where somebody else wants to take you, where someone else's plans want to take you, or where just the circumstances of the day, or the pandemic or the employer or whatever the case is, happens to take us. Right. And again, this doesn't matter what level you are, whether, you're listening to me now and you're the president of your board, you're the intern at an organization, whatever the case is, it does not matter. The fact of the matter is, and what is 100% not refutable, is that if you do not have clarity on what's important to you and how you're going to bring that to fruition, right? If you don't have a strategic plan for your career, you're going to default to somebody else's plan for you. That's the bottom line. You're going to default to somebody else's plan for you. So it's absolutely critical that you're not just along for the ride and find yourself lost along the way. Now, here's what we're going to cover today, right? Just performance reviews. It's very straightforward. It's the what and the why and what's the problem. And then I want to end with quality questions, right? I want to end with actual quality questions that I want you to take away. And I'm going to kind of crowdsource and have you provide questions that you find valuable to kind of progress the outcomes that you want to create with performance reviews, whether you are giving the review or whether you are receiving the review, right? Whether you're like creating your own review and now waiting for your boss to get it back to you. So I want you to keep that outcome focus in mind throughout our entire conversation. Keep that outcome focus in mind. And hello to everyone saying hello, in the chat. I appreciate that. I love people being interactive, so don't be shy. Feel free to engage, ask me questions, etc. And absolutely being clear about objectives and intentional with how we achieve them. That is strategy, right? That is strategy. And also being intentional about what we're not going to do. And I'm not going to get too far into that today, but just keep in the back of your mind that strategy isn't just what you're going to do, but there's kind of this blissful experience from making a decision and saying, okay, these are the 5 things I'm going to do, right, to get me to that end. And these are the 15 things I am not going to do, at least not for now, to get me there. Because otherwise we have like, shiny object syndrome. So what that beautiful commitment and decision to a strategy does is it allows you to actually focus, to say, okay, this is the path that we're taking, as opposed to meandering off the path, right? Because you didn't actually take anything else off the list. So again, going a little bit off, but hopefully that's helpful when you think of strategy that way. So let's get started. I want to hear from you guys. How do you guys define performance reviews? What are they? We're going to get into the what and the why briefly. So what are performance reviews? What are they for? What is that? What are performance reviews? What are they for? They're not just to cause us angst and stress, once a year. What are they for? And I'll be frank, I think that the once a year notion is actually at fault for a lot of the performance challenges and angst around performance reviews. And I'll get into why that is in a moment. But let's talk about what are performance reviews? Right? Performance reviews are a kind of a systematic opportunity, typically once a year, to, in a kind of formal way, have the employer, have the manager provide feedback and direction to the staff who report to them, right? That, in a nutshell, I know there are slightly different ways to describe that, but in a nutshell, that's what it is, right? To identify opportunities and strengths and maybe gaps in performance that you want to see prioritized, things like that. Yeah, and it's improvement and goal setting, absolutely, right? Thanks, Selena. That is really what it's about. It's part of a process of continuous improvement. At least that's I believe how it should be seen. It's part of a process of continuous improvement. And why do we do this? Why do we have, these annual performance reviews? There are probably a couple of reasons. They not only allow you to measure progress and pivot, and I love this, they allow you to measure progress and pivot as you go along the way. They'll allow you to further clarify expectations, right? What else? What else do they allow us to do? They allow us to have a very deliberate conversation that we might not otherwise be having. Now, see, herein lies the rub, that performance reviews often are set up to require, kind of like taking, annual sexual harassment training, right? It's required in order to ensure that we have this knowledge, we're brought to this awareness at least once a year, because there's this recognition that we might not otherwise ever create the opportunity to have those conversations. But see, performance reviews are really should not live in that space, right? Because the performance management process, while the review is one step in that process, the performance management process is really ongoing and continuous. Do you guys agree? The performance management process, it's ongoing and it's continuous, right? And it's not about, um, catching people messing up and figuring out how to manage them out of the organization, right? That's not what I'm talking about. And I know that often that is where we start to try to get strategic, because we want to document everything that we're doing so that we don't get in trouble when we go ahead and, my euphemism, invite people to explore other opportunities, right? Because not everybody is right for every role, and that's okay. And of course, we want to be deliberate and intentional with what we're doing in that space and how we're kind of coaching them out of the organization. But here's the thing, it needs to be throughout the year. And it's not just about things going wrong. It's about things going right. It's about those goals, those objectives, those dreams, the why, what it is that has the person drawn to your organization and keeps them there. And even what's having them roll their eyes from week to week and wondering, what am I doing here? Right? All of this. Absolutely. And Victoria, you're absolutely right. Agreed, but that's not always the case. It is not. We see it as a necessary evil. And I got to tell you, it is so much more than that. It is such an opportunity to be in line. And I'll talk more about that. Obviously, I have a lot to say about this, but it's just such an opportunity to stay in line with what's important to the organization, to your team, the alignment of your objectives, making sure that you're all speaking the same language and rowing in the same direction, that people understand where they fit into the bigger picture, right? Because talk about low engagement. Nothing guarantees low engagement more than not understanding where you fit in, right, to what's going on. So what are some of the problems that you guys see as it relates to performance reviews? What are some of those problems? I know I alluded to one. I didn't allude. I guess I probably, hammered it in. But the fact that we treat it as kind of a one and done or a once a year necessary evil. But what else? What else? What are the problems that you see with performance reviews? Why do we dislike them so much? I know my reasons, but I want to hear from you guys. Why do we dislike them so much? I'm seeing your comments here. Tanya, let's see, let's share this. Yeah, normally performance review is good on a quarterly basis to make sure the plan established, and a yearly basis is well aligned. Absolutely. And that expectations are clear, right? Who knew? Expectations being clear more than once a year. And you'll hear more about this in a moment when we get into some of those questions and also some of the problems that we run into. Let's see, in terms of problems, Selena, there's no follow-up. Absolutely. There's often no follow-up. Again, because it's a necessary evil, it's sometimes approached as a one and done conversation in both directions, right? Because is it fair, as I just mentioned, if you're the CEO of your career, as the CEO, how often would you be engaging in conversations about how your organization is doing, about the entity that you're the CEO of, how that entity is doing, right? So it's not all on the manager's lap in terms of your performance, because let's face it, you guys, I want to get super clear with this. I'm not saying it's not the organization's responsibility to have a performance review process that really works and that's effective and that supports your growth and your expansion and your leadership and all of that. But no one has more agency in your career and in your development than you do. No one. There is no boss. There is no organization. There's no performance review process that's going to have more agency in your growth and development than you. So if it doesn't work, if the organization you're with doesn't have it worked out, you need to work it out. You need to get it figured out, and you need to be having those conversations. And I'll get farther into that. But some more problems with performance reviews. They're a snapshot of performance past. Yes. And what's a problem with the snapshot? What's the problem with the snapshot, you guys? That we're missing everything that happened in the other 99.9% of the time that snapshot didn't capture. Another problem is that it's hard to articulate our contributions. It can be. It can feel really difficult to articulate our contributions. And I'll tell you, this is, for me, I'm Gen X. And for us, I think that what was drilled into us was humility. So what I try to drill my team members is performance reviews are not a time for humility. You need to cut that out. Performance reviews are not a time for humility. You go ahead and articulate your value, however little or however much it might be, in any way that you can. And if it's too uncomfortable because you're talking about yourself, pretend you're writing it up about your best friend, about a team member that you feel very strongly about. How would you articulate their contributions if they looked like yours? So I'm going to continue. Shouldn't be surprised because it wasn't brought up when it happened. Yes, and I talk about this in a second, but folks, there should not ever be any surprises. The performance review is not an unveiling opportunity. If that is what's happening, you are doing it wrong. I don't care what organization you're in, what type of organization it is, or what type of performance review it is. If there are surprises and there are aha moments for the person you are reviewing, you're doing it wrong. And if you're the employee, you're the person reviewed, and there are surprises, you need to wonder why you didn't question the opportunity to receive feedback, right? So, I don't mean to be harsh, but we need to take responsibility because we're the CEOs of our careers. A bad manager or a poorly informed manager or poorly equipped manager shouldn't be what's guiding your career. You guys with me? You need to be what's guiding your career, whatever level you're at. An ineffective board shouldn't be the reason your career is derailed and you have no direction in terms of where you're going next. So ratings can be stressful and problematic. The employee is so focused on the rating, they don't hear the feedback. Absolutely. And I talk about this too in a second, but we have a tendency, all right, on both sides to make it very personal and to use performance reviews as some sort of proxy for our personal worth. And yet nothing can be further from the truth, right? Your worth is infinite. Your worth is infinite. And to make a performance review a proxy for your worth or your contributions or your sense of self or your esteem is just, it's a death sentence. That's not where we want to be going. Yeah, performance reviews are sometimes treated as a task list where the employee writes down every little thing they worked on. And time spent does not equal quality work. Yes, Kristen, that's so accurate. Time spent does not equal quality work. Being busy does not mean being effective. Being busy does not mean contributing. You guys with me? Not the same thing. And yearly reviews do tend to have a recency bias. Absolutely. There is no doubt. That's simply how our brains work. There's both that snapshot, but there's also recency. And the other side is, just again, because of the way that our brains work, we have feelings and opinions about people. Just because you're a boss or the actual CEO or COO or board president of an organization, it doesn't mean that you stopped being a human being. You have opinions about people. So there's going to be this halo and horns effect, right? You're the people who you think are kind of awesome, you're going to catch them winning all the time. The people who you think are not so awesome, you're going to be scrutinizing them. You're going to overlook when they win, and you're only going to catch the mishaps, because that is the way our brains work. It's not because you're trying to, play rough or anything like that. It is just a natural human tendency. It is a natural human tendency. So I'm going to keep going. And let's see. And I see Michael, I'm not sure if that's a question or comment, but one of the problems is if we dislike them, it's a reflection of our coaching and leadership. Yes. And again, I think this is alluding to what I was just saying, right? Regarding that horns and halo effect. That if we like them, it's all good. And we'll have a tendency to exclude and not provide the type of feedback and expectation management that would have been available had we stepped back and looked at it through a slightly different lens, which I'll talk about in a moment. And, there are a couple of other, I'm going to get into the problems now that, some of just the top problems, some of which you guys have mentioned here. But, there are a couple of other things that happen here. And that is that, and I see Dorothea, provided a comment here, that employees often don't recognize their own accomplishments and self-reviews. And you advise your colleagues and teammates to set aside these in a separate email folder. I love that. Yes, you need to have an accomplishment log, like literally an accomplishment log or accomplishment folder. It was very easy, actually. And for my team members, I'd actually have a folder. And when there was an interaction that either they forwarded to me or that one of our stakeholders forwarded to me, I would drag it into the accomplishment folder so that I can go back and see. Right. As far as I was concerned, the performance reviews, because of the nature of the work and the type of team members that I would supervise, these were team members who were often senior project leaders for other parts of the enterprise, right? For example, in a consulting firm. So of course, you'd want to be sure that you're receiving input from those key stakeholders. You can't do it in a bottle or in a box or anything like that in a silo. It needs to be taking into account all of those sources of feedback, not just the ones that are convenient. Is it more work? Of course it's more work. Is it more effective and more thoughtful and a more deliberate approach to leadership and employee development? Of course it is. So of course it's worth it. But the other thing I wanted to say, and that's Dorothea's comment actually reminded me of this, is that we have a tendency as human beings, again, it doesn't matter what level you are, we don't outgrow these tendencies. We just get to be a little more aware of them. But we have a tendency to overestimate the value of our contributions, right? This is one of the things that can happen with the way that our brains process, and underestimate the value of another's contribution. We have a tendency to overestimate the difficulty we went through to get from A through Z, but when we observe what others did, or think we observe what others did or how others got to A through Z, we have a tendency to simplify it and to assume that their path of A through Z, even if it was identical to ours, was actually much simpler and much easier. And again, we don't do this, again, out of malice or because we're playing rough with people. It's just a simple human tendency because we know the angst we went through. We know the sleepless nights. We know the level of reflection and contribution it required, and coordination and collaboration and engagement. Like, we know because we were there. But we don't know what was required when it comes to others. So we assume that because they didn't articulate along the way every single thing that they did, that it was much simpler than it really was. So again, something to keep in mind as it relates to performance reviews. So I'm going to keep going. Now, we talked about surprises briefly a second ago, and I want to talk about that again just for a moment. I want to be really deliberate about that. As I said earlier, there cannot be aha moments. No aha moments in performance reviews. You should not ever be surprised by anything that's being shared in a performance review if you're on the receiving end. And folks, if you are on the delivery end, if you are the boss, don't you dare add something in that performance review that you haven't already clearly discussed with your staff in the past and already established expectations about, and made sure they're clear on what the gap is between their actual behavior that's being demonstrated, or the results being demonstrated, and the expected results or behavior that you want to see demonstrated. Don't do it, right? That is a leadership fail. And this opportunity is then lost, right? It's then lost because at some point then, when the folks are in shock and awe, you're just trying to be right. And you've now lost the opportunity to create relationship, to establish goals, to help support your staff members as you move on with those performance reviews. But again, that happens because we didn't start out with the end in mind, right? We didn't start out outcome focused. Like, what am I trying to accomplish here? What's most important here? And we'll get to that as I get to some of those questions at the end, but please keep this in mind. No surprises. It's absolutely not allowed. If you consider yourself or want to or aspire to be an effective, intentional, strategic leader, no surprises at performance review time. Okay, I'm going to continue. Confusing priorities. Now, didn't advance. Confusing priorities are, talk about a nemesis. We think we just want people to be awesome, right? We just want people to be awesome when we're reviewing them. We just want them to be awesome in every way. But that doesn't work in terms of employee performance management, growth, engagement, development, etc. It just simply does not work. Hold on, let me remove that. You need to know what to look for. They need to know what you're looking for. You need to be clear on what's most important to the success you want to see in their role. What's most important to the success in their role? They need to understand what, from your perspective, is moving the needle as it relates to that barometer for success. What is moving the needle? You cannot just say, well, be industrious and, show up on time and just do a good job. You know what it is to do a good job. No, it is your responsibility to articulate what it means to do a good job and to be curious about whether they get it. Do they get it? Just because you said it doesn't mean they get it. That is a huge management fail. It is a myth, an error in our understanding. We believe that because we said it and because we think about it in a certain way, that others do as well. That is incorrect. That is inaccurate. Okay. The other thing, and I know I mentioned this a moment ago, is that when you don't have clarity about what expectations are, like really, really real actual clarity, what we end up doing is we end up focusing on whether we like them or not, right? We end up focusing on whether we like the individual or not versus on that observable behavior. The bottom line is, though, that performance reviews are an opportunity for you to look for the values or behaviors or characteristics or attitudes that you want to see demonstrated. But the only way to look for those values, attributes, characteristics is to articulate them up front so you know what to look for. Because otherwise, otherwise you cannot catch them winning. You guys with me? If you're not clear what's actually most important, you're not going to be able to catch your staff winning. And there's nothing more demoralizing than feeling that no matter what you do, you're not being seen. You're not being recognized for your contributions. You're spinning your wheels and lost in the noise somewhere. Okay, so let's see. The other one is, regarding this getting personal, this is one of the problems. Be mindful and careful about whether you're inadvertently making your staff responsible for how you look, right? And I mean how you look from an ego perspective. There are expectations, there are performance standards. We know we need to meet them. We know we're trying to deliver certain things on behalf of our department, of our organization, et cetera. But be very mindful when the reason that you're having a problem with an employee is because they're making us look bad. Because what we'll do when we're making decisions from that place, the way that we make decisions when we're coming from a place of ego is very different than the way we make decisions when we're outcome focused and deliberate and strategic. And I'll talk a little bit about that later. I'm not getting too far into that in this conversation, but I want to make sure that you're incredibly clear that you're only looking at and judging them on the demonstrated attitudes and attributes and behaviors and outcomes, as opposed to your annoyance with that they're not making you look as good as you want them to make you look, right? Just another faux pas that comes from not necessarily being strategic when you're approaching performance reviews. Now, I want to get briefly onto the other side. Now, when it comes to your own review, some of the challenges that we see is being busy. And somebody alluded to this earlier here, right? But also one of my clients was sharing how there is a team member who's not necessarily doing a great job, but what the team member would do, this is a senior team member, is, send emails talking about how many hours they worked and how they worked through the weekend, but it didn't allude in any way to the actual outcome they created. So basically, I was really, really, really busy. I just want you to know how busy I was, not producing anything. That doesn't work. Being busy is not a proxy for actually contributing to your organization, to those goals, to those priorities, and to the outcomes that you're there to create. So be clear. What are you there to do? Being busy is the thing that we do when we don't have clarity on our role, when we don't understand what's important to the organization, when we don't understand why we're doing what we're doing. We default to being busy, right? And as I like to say, the only thing you get from throwing more spaghetti at the wall is a dirtier wall. So stop throwing spaghetti at the wall. You need to get crystal clear on what's actually important in this role, what's expected of you, and then which competencies you might need to kind of amp up a little bit in order to have those contributions be expressed in a way the organization sees them. Now, I know that's a lot that I wrapped into that, but again, as CEO of your career, is it any surprise? Is it any surprise that you're responsible for understanding what's most important? Of course not. Of course it isn't. So know what's most important. I know that a lot of the performance review processes, spell out these, 1,000 different, things. And of course I'm exaggerating, but honestly, they're probably a good 20. And I don't know, you guys can drop in the chat however many, kind of attributes we're looking for in your performance reviews. But we wrap ours up with, These are the values we're looking for. These are the contributions we are looking for. These are the priorities we're looking for. Folks, if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. You with me? If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. You know this. So you need to get clear and ask. If your organization has fallen into the folly of making everything a priority, you need to get clear and ask. What's the actual priority here? What's most important as it relates to delivering on the organization's top intentions? Okay, next one is a lack of alignment. And again, this falls into what I just mentioned. You want to have alignment with what's most important to the organization. Where do you fit into the organization's strategic plan? Something I like to say often, and I often post it on LinkedIn, is the only thing more important than knowing where you fit into your organization's strategic plan is knowing where they fit into yours. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because there's a lot in that statement, because it assumes that not only do you know what's important to your organization, but that you have a strategic plan for yourself and you understand where, whether, and to what extent they fit into your strategic plan, right? You are the CEO of your career. You need a strategic plan for your career. So don't just look to your organization to see, well, what are they doing with me? I think the better question is, what am I letting them do with me? And is this what I want to let them do with me? Or if so, how do I need to speak up or ask for support, etc.? So again, be careful when you feel like you don't have any idea where you fit into your organization's strategic plan. Not every organization is very good at cascading and aligning and helping you recognize how your contributions translate to that bigger picture. So you need to become the sleuth. You need to become, just really good at understanding where you fit in or if you fit in, right? Okay. Let's see. We're going on to this last one we're going to touch on today. That's, again, and I said this earlier on, but it's making it about your worth. Be careful about making your performance review about your worth. So see, the way that our brains work is depending on what's kind of the driver for our thinking. That's what's going to be the driver for the outcomes we get to create. So I want you to think about it for a second. When you walk into a discussion, whether it's with your boss or a client or your board or whatever the case is, and the predominant thought or attitude you're walking in with is something like, they don't respect me, I want you to think about the type of options that are going to seem available to you, the type of ideas or creativity that's going to surface. If you walk into a room, so you guys feel free to share in the chat, because I want you to actually try this on. Right? I want you to try this on. You're walking into a room, and let's say you're walking into a room with some difficult stakeholders or someone, frankly, you just do not like, do not respect, or do not appreciate working with. And the predominant thought you're taking into the room with you is, they don't respect me. How are you going to show up? How clear is your brain going to be? How strategic are you going to be? There's a very good chance you're going to get wrapped up in your head trying to look good, trying to prove yourself, instead of focusing on, for example, if you'd walked into the room saying, now, it may well be that they don't respect you, right? So I'm going to be clear. Sometimes they don't respect you. Sometimes they don't want to catch you winning. That is possible, and that may be 100% accurate. That may be the fact. But why should that be what's informing how you show up, how effectively and clearly you're thinking, right? The intentional way that you're communicating in the moment. What happens when you walk in with that, oh, they're judging me or they don't respect me, is what? You end up getting lost in your head. We end up getting reactivated. We lose all of our good ideas. Our prefrontal cortex isn't available to help us be brilliant. So I want you to keep that in mind. The quality of your thinking matters, you guys. The quality of your thinking matters. What is your thinking telling you as you walk in? I'm not suggesting that they're not judging you. What I am suggesting is that there are another 10 thoughts that are equally true and that are more supportive of what you're trying to create, right? So going from they don't respect me, which may be true, to I'm going to show up and contribute because I have ideas about how we need to move this initiative forward. Or I always have good ideas, so I'm going to show up and that's all that really matters right now. How different is that experience going to be for you? So again, I'm a kind of getting slightly off path, but I want you to really be clear. The quality of your thinking matters, especially when we're talking about performance reviews in a place where we have a tendency to get reactivated, right? Because there are a couple of places that you can go. You can be strategic, meaning you walk in asking what's most important here, or you can be reactive, meaning you're looking to everybody else to see how they're behaving. And then based on how they behaved, you're going to decide to what extent you're going to show up powerfully, effective, or intentionally. No, that's not how that works. You are a strategic, intentional leader, whatever your level is. You're a leader. And being a leader means you elicit the best from yourself and others towards a common goal, right? So if you're a leader, and again, it doesn't matter what your level or title is, because it has nothing to do with that. You're walking into that room distinguishing what is that common goal I'm trying to move myself and others to. So what is it? What is that common goal? When you walk into a room with that in mind, it's a lot harder to get reactivated, to get, all stuck in your head about what did they mean by that? Why are they questioning me? Or they're probably judging me, or whatever else is going on in there, right? The inner critic in our head. We all have it, but it's up to us to what extent we let it guide what we do next. Okay, so I'm going to go on because we're running low on time, but I hope you guys are seeing this. I hope this is helpful and that you're kind of drawing those parallels. We're not done yet. We're actually going to, some questions that I think will help your decision making. So let's go. Actually, I'm going to briefly run you through this because I wanted to explain to you why it is that our brains go where they go, right? Because they don't actually have to go in that direction that they go. So I want you to understand briefly what it is that's happening in your head and often in most people's heads. Now, this is the framework that I use when I'm working with clients, whether they one-on-one or in my group programs. So some of you have already seen this, but I want you to understand why the framework is so important. Because you do need to have mastery, and the order in which you approach it or develop it actually matters. Right? So there's self-mastery, role mastery, and that last one that's kind of wonky is leadership goal mastery. Okay? So, I hate when it shows up this way. Sorry, you guys. This is hard to read, but the let me see if I do it this way, it might actually. It's not, no, didn't fix it at all. Okay, that didn't fix it at all, but I'm going to go ahead and leave it large, and you might be able to make out some of the garble, but I will also post these on the event so that you can actually see the entire framework and actually read all of the words. But what I want you to focus on here is that self-mastery is really about having the awareness, removing blind spots, and having clarity around your self-perception, right? So that you can walk in and make decisions out of self-confidence, as opposed to making decisions out of how is everybody else behaving and what do I think they're thinking about me. That doesn't work. Like walking in, making decisions based on how you think other people are judging you doesn't work, which is why getting personal on performance reviews doesn't work. It's got to be about the expected behavior, the desired outcome, and the gap between that, right? And the exact, observable either steps or tasks or results that need to be seen in order to fill that gap. You guys with me? So it cannot be personal, because this is where we go, and this is what most people don't have handled. And when you don't have self-mastery, the rest doesn't fall into place either, and you'll understand why. The next one is role mastery. So role mastery is having absolute clarity around what moves the needle as it relates to success in your role, whether it's success as the team leader, as the board president, as the CEO, or the VP, or the intern. You need to understand what is required to have success, because once you know what moves the needle in those areas, then you can make decisions with different priorities around how to build those competencies, how to ensure that you're demonstrating those behaviors and attitudes that master most. You guys with me? So you need to have that clarity. But you can only get there after you have some sense of self-mastery and can set the ego aside a little bit, because otherwise you get all up in your head about being judged. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be clear on what actually moves the needle. Because here's the thing, even if your organization has it wrong, I'm just going to choose a role as an example. You know that as a VP of engineering, your intention is to submit, 20 fantastic, plans by the end of the year. You know that that's what's moving the needle. So from there, you can start making decisions about, okay, great. Where am I best at that? Where am I most challenged by that? How do I need to help support my team to help deliver on that? But see, you can get really intentional, because otherwise it can feel like your role is everything. I mean, who here has a role that's actually gotten more specific and more detailed and removed responsibilities over time? I have yet to see that. In fact, if you're good at your role, there's a very good chance more has been layered on. So again, it becomes even more important to have that role mastery and that clarity and all that good stuff going on. Now, the last one is leadership goal mastery. And again, in this garble over here that you can't read, what that's really about is understanding your intentional leadership style. Because up here up front, because of the need for self-awareness, this is where you get to discover your default leadership style. And it's important. We all have a default leadership style, and it's often driven by our values and our own personal priorities. But then once you've cleared away some of the ego, once you understand what it is that you're trying to create and the success that you have access to in your role or for your teams, then you can have all of that inform your intentional leadership style. Like, what do I want to be counted on for? What don't I? Like, am I the kind of person that someone who needs a lot of hand holding and nurturing should come to? Like, for example, full transparency, I'm not. I'm the kind of person that you work with if you're really industrious. And you can kind of go out there and Google the crap out of it until you have some pretty good perspective. And then you can come ask me some informed questions, right? I know that about myself. So as much as I want to be able to say something like, oh no, I'm a nurturing leader, just bring me somebody with the right attitude and I will do the rest. That's not true. I would drive them crazy and they would drive me insane. So if you ever feel like you're slamming your head against the wall and just so frustrated with your team or with your boss, there's a very good chance that there's a misalignment there, that you didn't clarify your leadership style. You didn't clarify what's most important to you to get the best out of you, right? You didn't clarify how you contribute best. And there's a lot that goes on in this space, right? This is also where you create a strategic plan for your career. And again, we do this near the end, or at least halfway through, because at that point, you've cleared away some of the ego nonsense. And you can start making deliberate decisions, right? The kind of strategic thinking that is going to support you, not only in your current role, but the way that you interact with others, the way that you move forward your priorities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So let me move on. And then the bottom line is thinking mastery. That's the intention all the way through, because the quality of your thinking matters, right? If we hammered nothing else in, it's that the quality of your thinking matters. We want that to be top of mind. What is driving your thinking? What is driving your decisions? Was this the bad attitude or the eye roll in that meeting you were in? What is it? And what do you want driving your thinking and your decisions, guys? Sorry, folks, I need to get better at that. So, pardon me. What do you want driving your decisions? What would make sense in that space? Okay, I'm going to get through this. So, the bottom line, though, and where we run into the most struggle is not understanding that you can't take external action to address an internal struggle. Let me go back because I want you to see what that means. You cannot have your list of expectations. I know these are the competencies I'm going to develop. This is how I'm going to dress. This is what I'm going to say. This is how I'm going to act, without having the self-mastery in place. And the reason for that, right, it's not just because it's a good idea, but the reason for that is that then you just end up being, performative. There's no real intention behind what you're doing other than trying to check the box, trying to look good, as I like to put it. But when you have self-mastery, there's intention, like actual authentic intention. I don't mean the kind of intention like, a used car salesperson who wants you to think that they're your best friend from the moment you walk on the lot. But of course, you know that that's not the case, right? You know that. And you know that doesn't line up, and you get that sense from the moment you're there. But the funny thing is, we believe that we can do that with other people, that we can walk in being performative and trying to check the boxes, and that they won't get a weird sense about us. And yet we always do, right? Do you ever have the experience of saying, wow, that person said all the right things, they did all the right things, but I don't know, something's still not landing? This is why. You cannot take external action to address an internal struggle. If your problem is with self-confidence, you can't just show up with more bravado. If your problem is that you don't feel that you have enough training or competence, you can't just go out and start getting all the training and doing all the things without having absolute clarity about what's actually going to move the needle. It doesn't work that way. That's like dropping your keys in the garage and looking for them in the driveway because the lighting's better. Folks, that's not where you're going to find what you're looking for. That's not how that works, right? We got to go where the fight is. And the fight is typically, especially as it relates to performance reviews and leading others and developing others, the fight lives in that self-mastery. It lives in that clarity of perception, understanding your triggers, understanding your blind spots, knowing that you can count on yourself to have your own back if things don't go according to plan, and not turning it into a death sentence for your self-esteem when you said something wrong or did something silly or got embarrassed, right? Because when we do that, we stay in that kind of reactive space and, oh my God, now what do I need to do to look good and for them to like me and blah, 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 as opposed to what an intentional, powerful leader would do, would be doing what, right? Walking in thinking, what's most important here? So again, briefly, those questions, I'm not going to get into the decision driver journey, but I'll send you a link so you can see about that. I want to get into the questions very briefly. For the reviewer, here are some questions I recommend you take with you, right? What's most important here? What's most important here? And then as I wrote here, it's not about being right. The other question, and I know a lot of you guys are going to shrink away from even considering asking this, is how can I be a better blank to you? It might be, how can I be a better manager to you? Right? It might be, how can I be a better partner to you? How can I be a better support to you on these goals? How can I provide you with feedback that's more effective to you? You're going to be hesitant to ask this. And if you are hesitant to ask this, that's because you're making decisions out of ego. So I want you to catch yourself. If you do not want to ask your team members, how can I better support you? What are we doing that's making you roll your eyes? Actually, my old boss, Isaac, one of the best bosses I've ever had, would always ask that. Is there anything that's making you roll your eyes? Because Isaac knew that that was a source of disengagement and dissatisfaction for employees at every level. So you would always ask. Brilliant. Again, what ideas do you have for closing the gap? And that is the gap between that desired behavior or outcome and what's been demonstrated, right? What's been observed of that employee. And again, what can I provide more or less of to support your goals? And then for yourself, I'm gonna have you pose this question to yourself. How can I catch them winning? Because oftentimes, especially if there's a poor performance problem, we are tuned into the problem and not to the solution. So I want you to get really clear about how you can catch them winning, what that would look like. And then tell them. Don't keep it a secret. Tell them. Be clear and open about it. You're an intentional, deliberate, strategic leader. Be clear. For the employee, the person being reviewed, whatever level you are, again, what's most important here? Again, that question lives everywhere because a strategic leader is consistently asking themselves, what's most important here? And then allowing that to inform what comes next, right? What specific observable behavior do I want is desired? And do I understand it, right? What's the best way to get support on this, to develop this, behavior, capability, whatever the case is? And then do I have enough information to close the gap? Do I have enough information to close the gap? So you guys, I know we're at time, but I want to open it up. I will stay here for a few minutes and I want to hear from you guys. What are your key takeaways? What are your key takeaways? And I'm going to share this here because I want to make sure everybody's aware. For those of you interested in my group program, I'm not really talking about it here. I do want to let you know that the free one-on-one goal planning session bonus ends today. So you can go to the site and read about it. I don't want to take up time here to talk about it, but I do want to know, what are your key takeaways? What are your key takeaways? How is this informing what you do next or how you approach performance reviews? I want to hear from you guys. Oh, funny. So here's a question from Selena. Thanks for asking the question. How to manage an employee that is in a constant state of eye rolling. Okay. What are they rolling their eyes at? Right? We need to be curious, folks. As leaders, we need to understand, what is causing the reactions we're seeing? What is causing the outcomes we're seeing? Get curious. Why are they rolling their eyes? I know teenagers seem to roll their eyes at everything, but adults don't typically. Adults often roll their eyes at something that feels like it doesn't make sense. So what might not make sense, or what conversation is missing that if you had that conversation, if you could address that question, they'd get it, right? And yes, it definitely, I would agree, it's a misalignment. They don't understand how this fits into the bigger picture and why it makes sense. And sometimes it doesn't make sense, in which case have the conversation and you get to question it as well, right? Maybe there's something you don't understand as the boss about how this makes sense, how it contributes to the bigger picture. Okay, what else? And again, I'm going to leave this one up here. Yeah, move the needle and ask why they're eye rolling. So that's what you're going to do next. Excellent. Yeah, what moves the needle, you guys? What actually moves the needle? Like, what actually moves you closer to success? And I know we've been kind of taught to ask the question, well, what does success look like? At least I hope we have all here been taught to ask the question, right? What does success look like? But really, what does success look like? And what tactics, strategies, or characteristics are necessary to move towards that, to move that needle? Get really clear and stay super curious. We get caught up in our busyness, and some of the stuff we do is out of ego. Again, we just want to show up. We want to be in the right rooms, but it doesn't actually contribute to success in our role or success in our next role, right? Because that role mastery isn't just about your current role, but even that next role that you want to prepare for. How can you make decisions right now that set you up for success and to demonstrate the behaviors that will be necessary in that next role? Just continue to ask those questions, right? What's important about this? What is important about this? Let's see. The process is ongoing and continuous. Yes. Don't wait until it's time to invite people to explore other opportunities. Yeah. Sorry, you guys. I've been using that euphemism for a really long time, right? And when I say that, of course, just to make sure there's clarity, that is when we're trying to, coach people out or remove them from the organization. Don't wait until that moment. Get super clear. But the other thing is, and again, I'm going off topic and we're already over time, but I want to just be super clear, you guys. What you tolerate is a reflection of your leadership. So if you tolerate the lack of clarity, if you tolerate the low performance, without actively working at it, if you tolerate the eye rolls without questioning them, right? If you tolerate the constant burnout of your team because you're not able to give them sufficient direction, all of that is a reflection of your leadership. So, as you're assessing your team members, take it as an invitation to assess yourself and ask the scary question: how can I be a better manager to you? How can I better support you with your goals? If you are not asking that question, then you are making it about you. That is not what a leader does. It is not about you. You guys with me? I know this sounds really harsh, but this is one of those conversations where I want to be so real. It is not about you. It is about that bigger intention you're trying to get to. So what's going to be required of you? What courage are you willing to show up with to help have the right conversations and support your staff to that place? Get the right alignment, get the right resourcing from the organization so that you're not overworking your people, so that they know, even if you don't get the right resources, so that they're aware you're advocating for them, that you understand what the role entails. Because there's nothing worse than feeling unseen and unsupported. You guys with me? And again, it doesn't matter if it's feeling unseen and unsupported by your board, or if it's being unseen and unsupported by your staff or by your colleagues or by your partner. It doesn't matter. It's about the bigger intention always. What are you trying to create here? And how are your actions and decisions actually moving you towards that? Okay. Whew, that's been a good conversation. I hope that's been helpful for you guys. We can obviously keep on talking about this. Here's the one slide I was going to share regarding the intentional leadership program. If you're interested, please go ahead and go to the page, get more information. If you want to go ahead and have a time, to have a conversation with me, you can do that as well. But go to bridgewellpro.com/group, and you can learn about and sign up for the last 3-month program of the year. Just for transparency, the price has dropped by more than 50%. I changed the format slightly so that more people can join, and the price has dropped dramatically because I didn't want price to be an issue. You should know, though, although the conversation we're having here is for people at all levels and levels of experience, the intentional leadership program is for people with 10 plus years of professional work experience, right? Just for clarity and to be upfront about that. If, on the other hand, you work better one-on-one, I also want to invite you to reach out to me, send me a note, or go to my profile, and you can schedule time to meet with me one-on-one. Just to have that, free leadership assessment session and understand what it would be like to work together. But let me know if you have any questions. I'm here to answer questions. I don't charge for you reaching out to ask me a question, so just do that. But figure out what's going to be required of you to show up powerfully and strategically. What's going to be required of you? How do you need to think about it? What do you need to prioritize above and beyond your ego in order to be effective in your role? Right? If every decision you're making is prefaced with, am I going to be embarrassed? You've already you've lost the leadership angle, right? So what needs to happen so that you're focused on that bigger intention, on that bigger purpose, on that bigger idea, on the bigger outcome. Because if you can stay outcome focused, you're less likely to get wrapped up in your head and your ego, you guys. Less likely to get wrapped up in your head and your ego. Okay, so we've already gone over by almost 10 minutes. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here with me today. I know this is kind of a serious and heavy conversation, but I hope you see it really just takes a couple of tweaks in our outlook to take performance reviews to an entirely different level, to become an actual leadership tool, right? To help us be more effective, not only as employees, the person receiving the review, but as the person delivering the review. So thank you. And again, how are you going to make performance reviews at your organization more effective? How are you going to use them to be a more strategic leader? I will see you guys next month, or for those of you joining the program, I see some of the registrations coming in. I will see you at the kickoff in a couple of weeks. All right. Bye. Thank you, Victoria. Have a good week, you guys. Have a good week. And thank you. It's my pleasure. You are welcome. You are welcome. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Melissa. It's my pleasure. You're welcome, Tracy. Thank you for being here. Monica, thank you for being here. Dr. Alpana. Let's see. I know there are a whole bunch of folks I missed, but Dorothea and Julia, thank you for being here. Just good conversation. Take this away with you. Let me know what you did with it. And I will go ahead and follow up and drop the slide that I promised here on the event so that you can see it without it being garbled. Let's see. Michael, thank you for being here. And Samantha and Kristen and Angie and Samia and Judy and Tricia and Tanya. And again, I know I missed some of you, but thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here. Latcha, thank you for being here. Lizbeth, Nasheen. Okay, you guys, thank you so much. Have a great week. Be intentional. Decide what you want to create and go make it happen, and then send us a note. I want to know what happened. Okay, bye.